Welcome. My name is Grandma Storm. I write stories for young adults. Today I am reading chapters 16 through 20 in my book, The Book of Faith. "16. Old Scratch's belly was empty, and he wanted his pipe. He had second thoughts about the old man and the little girl being dead and being ghosts. Besides, he really needed a smoke. "Get out of your hole to yourselves and think," mumbled Old Scratch. "You're always good at that. Now just think about that old man and that little girl. I don't know where they be, but if'n they was dead people can't hurt you none. If'n ghosts bein' there, well, daylight scares them for sure. Fades 'em or something." Still meditating on murderous ghosts, Old Scratch headed out of the wood. At the edge of the trees, he peeked at the cottage. He itched his backside, hitched up his pants, and skirted around the mill and cottage to the tarp. Rummaging around, he pulled out a pipe, stuffed in some damp tobacco, and struck a flint. His pipe would not light. As he stood there, a heavy cloud dropped its burden of rain on top of his head. "Misery, misery," mumbled Old Scratch. For the sake of drying his tobacco, he ran to the cottage. Poking his head in the doorway with a tentative "Halloo!" he surveyed a comfy room with a stone fireplace. An armchair with a footrest was pulled close to the hearth. Near that was a hutch and a table with 2 stools. A little bed was covered in a pile of quilts. A long bed on the other side of the room had a blanket folded at its foot. Soon Old Scratch felt at home, just like he owned the place. He got his tobacco dry and his pipe lit. He opened the hutch and discovered a crock sealed with beeswax. Sitting by the shuttered window, he propped his muddy boots on the table and peeled off the thick wax. The fragrance of summer blackberries and wild honey filled the room. With a happy sigh, Old Scratch sucked jam off his dirty finger. He thought how nice it would be to have a fire in the fireplace. Old Scratch swiveled his head, looking for wood. He saw a bucket with kindling, but realized he would have to look for logs. Instead, he decided to stretch out on the bed. He had a rough time, cold, wet, and all. This was a stupid job. Soon the little cottage sheltered the snoring and snorting of Old Scratch. If there had been ghosts in that cottage, they certainly would have been frightened away by the racket. 17. The track joined a trail as the land lifted to the foothills. Thick woods thinned to pine trees and birches. Underfoot was less mud and more rock. A dry wind blessed them with a reprieve from constant wet. "Who are your friends, Pa?" asked Faith one morning as she rolled her blanket. "They live in the mountains. They are big men. Some call them giants. One other thing, you won't be able to understand them." "What do you mean, Pa?" "They have a different language." "Don't worry, I know how to talk to them." As he gave her breakfast, a crust of bread and an apple, he told her his friends lived in a fortress. As he rolled his blanket and packed the bundles, he told her his friends had lots of books. As he strapped the packs on Sonia and picked up his staff, He told her his friends ate 3 big meals every day. Visions of hot soup and buttered bread filled Faith's mind. She sighed. "How much longer, Pa?" "Each step brings us closer. Let us see how far we can go today." Miles later, as the light of day departed, a low boom of thunder rumbled in the west. The wind freshened. Turning a bend, Theophilus was heartened to see a giant boulder wedged against an ancient pine. The juncture of boulder and tree formed a shelter. He pointed it out to Faith, pulled Sonia's lead, and headed for the rock. The wind kicked with decided confidence, swirling pine needles into the air. The coming rain should erase all trace of smoke. He would risk a fire. Soon they were settled under the cave-like roof of the rock, enjoying a flicker of firelight. A wide crevice in the back of the rock formed an inner chamber. As he covered Faith with the blanket, a waterfall of rain fell over the rock. "Pa, it rains so much. It's like the sky can't stop crying," observed Faith as she cuddled close to him. "In the book, some rocks cry, don't they? In the story of the king and his brides, the rocks even shout." "Yes, true enough," he agreed. "Now this rock is not a shouting rock, but a listening rock. It has a name. The book calls it the Rock of Witness." Poking at the flame, he continued, "We are close to where my friends live. Long ago, before they climbed a mountain to build a fortress, they left all their words here. One by one, they spoke all the words they ever wanted to say to the Rock of Witness. It holds their words within its stony heart. Here they said their vows." "What is a vow?" "It is a promise. A vow lasts all your life." "What did the giants say to the rock?" "I do not know all they said, but I know they vowed to live in silence. They vowed to never marry. They vowed to live in poverty, owning nothing of their own. They vowed to never speak or leave the mountain until released by the king." "Have you made vows, Pa?" "Yes." "What did you vow?" "I will not tell you all my vows, but this I will tell you. I vowed to your dying mother I would care for you and teach you the way of the king. She loved you, Faith." "Did my mother make a vow to the king?" "I do not know. I do know she was faithful to him." "Pa, I want to belong to the king like you and my mother." With her eyes bigger than usual, Faith continued, "If I do this, will I be able to use words again, or must I become like your friends and leave my words behind?" Chuckling, he said, "You may keep your words." His mood shifted, his voice dropped, and his eyes sought hers. "If this is what you want to do, tell the rock what you will give the king. You are old enough. The rock is waiting." Faith hugged Pa and entered the inner chamber. Raw gems in the broken rock glittered and glowed, reflecting the dancing firelight. Touching the stony walls with her lips, Faith whispered, "Rock, please hear my vow." "Here am I, little Faith. I give the king all of me and all that I have." Later, her head pillowed on Sonia's fuzzy belly, Faith was disturbed from quiet dreams as the storm swirled around the rock. The wind twisted the pine, pulling a deep moan from the structure of stone and wood. Startled, Faith sat up. She saw Pa sitting by the glowing embers, facing into the storm. Is someone crying? Go back to sleep. Dawn is hours away. Then he added, on a night such as this, in a place such as this, the past returns, not in full, but in part. Go back to sleep. The little girl tried to think what the past returning meant. Thinking produced a yawn and a shiver. She pulled the blanket higher and settled her head on Sonia's white belly. Faith fell asleep, trusting the rain to wash away mysteries. The morning dawned, dripping and cool. Steel gray clouds capped the sky, and a chill wind blew. Theophilus knew there was one last ridge to climb, then an alpine valley to cross before they would be on the mountain. Late in the day, they crested the ridge. The valley lay before them. The dying light exposed a bleached expanse of bones. Pa, what is this place? The Valley of Dry Bones. Long ago, there was a battle. Most were slain. A handful survived. They could not bury so many dead. These bones remain as witnesses to a sad tale. If you like, I will tell you the story. It is in the book. Faith hid her eyes in the folds of Pa's cloak. How she wished she were home. I don't want to hear the story. That is just as well. After a moment, he spoke again. Once a wise man said, he who lies unburied has the sky as his vault. Somehow, that is small comfort. In silence, they picked a path through the bones. The next day began the hard climb. Faith needed to rest more often. Finally, Theophilus stopped, unstrapped the bundles from Sonia's back, took off his pack, and lashed them together. He lifted Faith onto the donkey. With a heave, he shouldered the burden and pulled on Sonia's lead. Light faded from the sky as the small party arrived at massive gates framed by walls of rock. Though no hand moved it, the gate swung open. Crossing a stone bridge over a yawning chasm, they came to a second gate, taller than the first. On it was a shield emblazoned with words Faith could not read, and curious, strange symbols. It also swung open of its own accord. Standing in an open courtyard were 7 giants, dressed in stone gray robes, their hooded faces shrouded by the gloom. Pa dropped the bundles from his back and lifted Faith from the donkey. They walked hand in hand to stand before the giants. Faith thought maybe she ought to curtsy, so she did. Anna, perched on Faith's head, bowed and cooed. For the first time on the whole trip, Sonia let out a noisy hee-haw. Faith looked up, up, up into the face of a giant and saw the flash of a grin. Pa made motions with his hands. One of the giants did the same. There was a pause. Something was decided. Pa turned to Faith. They say they are glad to see us. They have not had guests for a long time. We are welcome to rest here for 10 days. That is their rule. After that, we must travel on." "How did you understand that? You didn't say anything," whispered Faith. "Sign language. Come, they waited dinner for us, and they are hungry." "18. Leaving the village at dawn, Skiva spurred the horse's flanks. With liberal use of his whip, he calculated he could reach the river by nightfall. The hound followed tirelessly. At the cottage by the mill, Old Scratch woke from his nap. He stretched, yawned, and enjoyed itching his armpits for a while. He got up and poked around in a cupboard. He was happy to find more preserved. He liked it here. It was nicer than the hovel he called home. Pigs, the old mule, and tilling hard clay were the means he used to make a living. If the old miller and the little girl were gone for good, he might as well take over the mill himself. Yup, that's a clever idea for sure. The thought of ghosts haunting the cottage faded as food and rest had a positive effect on Old Scratch. He even forgot to light his stinky pipe. It was peaceful by the river. The cottage had a good slate roof with deep eaves. The stone floor was level. The bed was comfy. The fireplace was wide with an iron pot hung on a swivel. He felt inspired to find some wood and start a fire. He stuck his head out the door and noted a break in the clouds. With the thought of taking over the place, he decided to inspect the property. The mill machinery was well built. The shed was clean and bedded in golden straw. The loft was filled with fragrant hay. The well was covered with a wide slate roof just like the house, and a wooden bucket hung on a hand-carved pulley. He opened the wash house of his new property, finding well-seasoned wood stacked neatly against the wall. He also discovered a basin containing soft soap that smelled nice. It was scented with rosemary, but he didn't know that anyway. The thought occurred to him to combine the water from the well with the soap in the wash house to see what would happen. First, he tried a little soap and water on his hands. Safe enough. Then he rubbed soap on a wet cloth and scrubbed the back of his neck. Amazing. Next thing, he was stripped down to his skivvies and scrubbing away from his greasy red hair to his stinky big toes. He had not been this clean in a decade. He had vague thoughts of some woman scrubbing his ears, so he spent extra time on them. It occurred to him he had not thought of that woman in years. He half wondered what happened to her anyway. Lacking clean clothes, he slid into his old ones, weather ruining the effect. Yet Old Scratch emerged a new man. He didn't even have the urge to scratch his backside. As the sun set and a new rainstorm threatened, he kindled a fire in his hearth. He brushed off his table where he had indelicately put his muddy boots earlier in the day. Finding a broom, he swept the mess out his front door. He found a beeswax candle, lit it, and placed it on his table. He folded his wool blanket at the foot of his bed. He was just thinking about exploring his cupboard for another tasty morsel when he heard a hellish howl. Any medicinal value of clean air, good food, soap, and water evaporated. At the same time, he had the urge to scratch, wonder where he put his pipe, and wished for a dark bottle filled with something strong to swallow. He didn't get any further in his thinking, not to even think of hiding, when a horse, lathered white with sweat, galloped up to the cottage. The rider yanked the reins. The exhausted mare slid to a halt on her hocks. A great hound bounded to the door where Old Scratch stood, with his mouth agape. "Where is the girl, you fool?" demanded Skiva. 19. Misery, misery. When Skiva learned there was no little girl, he grabbed his horsewhip and chased Old Scratch all over the pretty little cottage. Crockery was smashed. Furniture was broken. Yanking Old Scratch to his feet, Skiva picked every scrap of information out of his addled brain. To escape his tormentor, Old Scratch ran outside. The hound jumped to his feet, bit Old Scratch in the leg, and pitched him into a puddle of mud. Misery, misery. "Get back in here," bellowed Skiva. "Find me something to eat, then see to the horse." The hound bared its teeth, issued a low growl, persuading Old Scratch to obey. He found Skiva a bottle of pickled onions and went to see the horse. The mare was trembling, her head hanging to the ground. Despite his own pain, Old Scratch was sorry for her. Kind of reminded him of his old mule. He walked her around to the shed, unsettled her, and unbuckled the bridle. The bit was bloodied. Her flanks were cut by spurs. He pulled some hay out of the loft. He decided to leave the gate open in case she wanted to drink from the water. Battered and bruised, Old Scratch stumbled in the rain to the tarp in the wood. In the cottage, the long bed was claimed by Skiva. Sniffling the quilts on Faith's little bed, the hound pawed them into a heap, turned 3 times, and with a huff settled on top. "Misery, misery," mumbled Old Scratch as the rain came down. 20. Morning light flickered through a narrow window in the rock wall. Faith sat up, throwing back warm blankets. She peered over the side of the bed and saw a stool. On the floor, neatly placed, were her clogs. On the other side of the room was a tall table and a chair to match. Where was she? Then she remembered the days of walking in the rain, the rock, the bones, the mountain, the iron doors, the giants, and then she remembered food and fell back in bed. There was plenty to eat here. She did not want to complain to Pa, but she was hungry on the trail. Then to come to this wonderful place in the mountains and enjoy a feast. Last night there was brown bread dripping with golden honey and mugs of goat's milk. There was a hot stew of beets and carrots and potatoes. The last thing she remembered was eating berries with 7 giants watching her. Oh yes, the giants. Pa said they were his friends. "Pa!" She flipped her belly and dangled her legs over the edge, reaching the stool with her toes. She climbed down and slipped on her clogs. Running to the huge door, she tried to reach the iron latch. She heard footsteps on the other side. "Pa!" The door swung open, revealing the enormous figure of a giant. She was about to hide under the bed when she saw Pa by his side. "Good morning," spoke Pa quietly. "Come out. I want you to meet my friend." Pa took her hand in his and smiled. He smelled like soap and was dressed in new gray wool shirt and trousers. "Faith, may I introduce Timon? He is the youngest guardian of this fortress." Timon wore a gray robe with the hood thrown back, exposing thick brown hair that flowed past his shoulders. Great green eyes crinkled at the corners, while a generous smile spread across the giant's wide face. The giant bowed to the little girl. Faith curtsied in return. Anna cooed, bobbing her head, making Faith giggle. "Hungry for breakfast?" Pa inquired. "Yes." "Good," said Pa, "but first, a bath." They followed the giants down a long hallway punctuated by oaken doors. Stopping before one, Timon lifted the latch. The joyful music of a waterfall spilled out of the room as the fragrance of a summer day wafted into the hall. "Faith, you need a good scrub and clean clothes," observed Pa with a wry grin. "Over there is a basket. In it you will find everything you need. Now go. Breakfast is waiting." The giant and Pa closed the door and left the little lady to her bath. Tall, wide windows lit the chamber. Looking up, she saw crags jutting from the cascade, alive with ferns and flowers. Water spilled into a stone basin and overflowed into a pool of smooth rocks. Faith kicked off her clogs to dip a toe in the pool. The water was hot. Anna took to wing, enjoying the spectacle of her mistress' bath from above. Throwing off her clothes, Faith ran under the waterfall. It was cold. Laughing and shouting, she splashed into the pool. Noticing a wooden tub of soft soap by a pile of thick cloths, she gave her skin a proper scrub. Closing her eyes, she plunged into the hot water and soaped her hair. Then she stood as long as she could under the waterfall, letting the cold flood rinse away the soap. Squealing, she jumped back into the hot pool. Faith sighed. Never had a bath felt so good or been more fun. Toweling her hair dry, Faith picked in the basket. Inside, she'd found panties, slip, and a dress in white cotton. Under those was a blue jumper as soft as Sonia's nose. A pair of socks knitted from the same wool were next. At the bottom were shoes with silver buckles. Everything fit perfectly. A gentle tap at the door brought Faith running and Anna following. Slowly, the door swung open. "Pa, look!" Faith jumped, twirled, and then remembered she was hungry. Anna took to her wings as her mistress danced. "Is it time for breakfast?" "Yes, Faith," laughed Pa. "Afterward, you must thank Parmenas. He stayed up all night to make these things for you." Faith learned each giant had his own work. Her first friend, Timon, tended the gardens and was wise to the ways of all things green and growing. There was Parmenas, who was expert in weaving and cobbling. They were the youngest giants. Stephen, the prior, was skilled in woodcraft. His carpentry furnished the fortress with chairs, tables, trunks, and beds. He showed Faith great wooden chests with false boards for hiding treasure. He showed her how he designed desks with secret drawers that opened when a panel was touched, just so. She thought these great marvels. She went all over the fortress, pressing suspect panels, poking odd carvings, and pulling loose knobs, looking for Stephen's tricks. Much to her delight, she found two. Curly-haired Nicholas was tall, even for a giant. He labored at a red-hot forge, where long ago he built the heavy gates and iron bars that secured the fortress. He understood rock and metal as if they were living and breathing creatures. He possessed all the skills of an expert stonemason and blacksmith. Pa told Faith that Nicholas was always busy inventing new wonders for the fortress. Philip had a shock of carrot-colored hair and shepherded a flock of goats. Sonia adored him. The donkey followed Philip everywhere and joined the goats when he took them to a highland meadow. Nicanor was as huge and as brown as the biggest bear that ever lived, yet he was as gentle and as kind as a grandmother. Nicanor was the cook. The harvest from Timon's garden, the milk and cheese from Philip's goats, and the provisions sent by the king were combined to make rich soups, stews, and puddings fit for giants. All Faith knew was that everything was delicious. Old Prochorus became a special friend to Faith. The first time he took her to his room of books, her eyes were dazzled by sunlight dancing through cut crystal set in the rock walls. Light-filled designs illustrated shepherds and battles, thrones and ladies, giants and stars. Overhead were balconies cantilevered over balconies. Faith thought she would fall backward trying to see the highest galleries. One day, at her request, Prochorus carried her up the winding stairs. One design in the windows especially interested her. It was of a tree. It reminded her of her own mothering tree, yet it was different. Somehow she felt sure Anna's tree looked just like that, only not made of crystal, of course. Faith looked up at Prochorus and quietly whispered, "Anna?" He nodded. She realized then that all the crystal windows told stories from the book. Each level housed shelves and tables stacked high with dusty tomes. She peeked over the edge, became frightened, and buried her face in the giant's great chest. Tenderly, he carried her back down the winding stairs. Faith spent 3 of her 10 mornings perched in a tall stool beside Prochorus. Pots of paint, inks, quills, brushes, and pens lay scattered about him. With a flourish of a brush, a stroke of color, or a detail with a pen, parchment sprang to life, telling a story from the book. There were other books, too, collections of maps and charts. Pa studied these. Timon made notations in books about gardening. Accounts, records, and histories, Stephen wrote in those. There were manuscripts on the strategies of war. Faith saw Nicanor reading from that stack. Faith, by nature, was a bit of a magpie. The no-talking rule was hard to bear. The giants cast ponderous frowns at her when she opened her mouth, so she tried to learn their sign language. Please, thank you, and more were signs she learned the first day. The rest she pantomimed Timon and Nicholas were especially good at this game and delighted in charades with the little girl. The dawning of the 10th day approached. Pa explained to Faith he wanted to take her to the king's land. It was the land of his birth, and he wanted to go home. Once over the mountain pass, they would descend into a valley and trek across an arid plain. Finally, they would come to the sea, where he hoped to find a ship to take passage. Going home sounded good to Faith, too. She sighed. If only home could be her cottage by the river. Thank you for listening. To hear more of the story, please come back soon, or you may purchase your own copy on Amazon. Just follow the link below. Until next time.